Hello, my name is Megan, or Meegloo, or Meg, or Meeg, whichever you'd like to call me, and it's nice to meet you guys. So, I really wanted to do some voiceover for this piece because it's a long one, so let's get into it. So, a little bit of context for this one. It was commissioned by a friend who asked me if I could draw a sexy nurse pinup girl, but as Cthulhu. To which I immediately said yes because that's an amazing idea. She gave me a lot of freedom with this piece because the only other parameters that I had were that she had to be holding a rotten apple and she really wanted the phrase "an apple a day keeps the madness away" added in there somewhere. So, other than that, I was really free to do whatever I wanted. So, the immediate concept that came to my head was to have this pinup girl sitting on one of those hill carts, kind of like from the 50s to match the whole pinup vibe. So, after a couple thumbnails, I decided on this pose just because I really liked it. It felt elegant, but still like showed off her curves, and it was kind of playful with the head tilt. Um, and here you can see me just absolutely struggling with wings. Normally, I draw the face first because it's my favorite part, but here I kind of procrastinated a little bit because I didn't really know how it was going to turn out. I've only ever drawn sexy women as humans, so the idea of making Cthulhu attractive underneath all those tentacles was daunting, to say the least. I figured though, let me draw a face like I normally would, and then I would build the alien elements around that structure. This was just the easiest way my brain could digest the challenge of drawing an alien but sexy. So I also looked up a bunch of reference of just Cthulhu's face, and not only does he have tentacles, but he also has a ton of ridges around the eyes and the forehead going back into the back of the head. So I didn't want to go like too crazy and lose those female elements, but I also wanted to keep it fairly foreign. At this point, I have a pretty good idea of where I want the piece to go. Send it back over to my friend. She says, "Looks great, just lose the tail." To which I say, "No problem." Because honestly, I wasn't keen on having that tail anyway, so imported this over to Photoshop, and I realized I hated the idea of this alien woman just floating in space. Although I guess it kind of fits with her being an alien and all. But it just didn't feel right, so I decided to add in a background. Something dark and grungy, a stark comparison to this perfectly made up and manicured Pinup Cthulhu girl who's there to absolutely ruin everyone's day. Now, I have very little experience with backgrounds. I'm sure a lot of artists can relate to avoiding backgrounds because they require so much more time and energy, more so than the character sometimes, which can already be a challenge. And as someone who doesn't do backgrounds, this was a lot for me. It was extremely daunting, and I felt a lot of pressure to get this quote unquote right because it was a commission for my friend, and I really wanted it to turn out exactly how I imagined it in my head. Now, this wasn't any pressure that my friend put on me or even any time constraints that she gave me to get this done within a certain amount of time. It was all just me putting pressure on myself, which honestly made this background really hard to work on. I mean, I couldn't work on it for more than 20 to 30 minutes at a time, and I really just have to thank my friend because she had all the patience in the world for me. I really procrastinated on this piece because I could only tackle it in small chunks because of how overwhelmed I felt. I also really wish that I had been more diligent about recording the footage for this piece. A lot of time was lost in just conceptualizing the background, gathering reference images, and trying to suit it to fit this piece's needs. But lucky for you guys, you didn't have to sit through the trials and tribulations that was trying to figure out what the heck this background was going to look like. So if you notice there are sudden drastic changes, it's fine. I just forgot to hit record that day. Really regret it. So in my procrastination on the background, I decided to give myself a break and do something that I know how to do, aka lining. I really enjoy lining once I have fully established all of the details in the sketch. Trying to figure out details in the lining phase is absolute torture, and I don't recommend it to anyone. This way I can focus more on the flow of the lines, the line weight, making sure that you get a good mix of bold lines against more thin lines, which I usually concentrate the thinner lines on the inside of the character, and then I try to focus the heavier lines on the outline of the character. So I really enjoy lining for different reasons than I enjoy the sketch phase. The sketch phase is all about like exploration and shape and figuring out the flow of hair or the fold of clothes and things like that. Whereas lining to me is enjoyable once I figure out all the details in the sketch phase, but then the line is what's going to show up in your final piece, because sometimes the sketch doesn't always make it. Also, that blissful feeling of getting the line work done and turning off the sketch layer and you don't hate it. Oh my god, chef's kiss. So here you can see I clean up the line art layer after turning off the sketch layer, and then you can actually see a to-do list in the corner, and it was because just whenever I'm feeling overwhelmed, I try to break it down into smaller chunks, and then it gives me the satisfaction of small goals and the reward of completing those goals. Oh, okay. So here you can see me try to figure out fishnets. I looked at inserting a pattern or trying to use a brush to get that fishnet effect, but ultimately it didn't look right. I lost the footage of me experimenting and trying different things. Ultimately, I decided I'm just gonna have to do it from scratch. So I went online, looked up a bunch of references of fishnets, and then I made those guidelines that you saw earlier about how the lines would kind of wrap around the body, and then just added diagonal lines to those lines. So just to recap the whole process, I went with a sketch layer to map out the direction of the lines. Then I went in with 2 different colors on 2 different layers and put in the final strokes. Then I merged them, got rid of the excess on the outline of the character, set alpha lock and colored them both black. And then the thing that really sells it that these are actually fishnets is if you go into the intersection at each of those diagonal lines and you just add a little extra thickness there. It just really sells it that this is actually fishnet tights being pulled and stretched over a leg. So with a little added confidence, now that I had the character fully lined and I was happy with how that was looking, I went and I lined the background objects. This includes the things on the pill cart, and then here you can see I went through and added this poster. Now, I'm gonna be honest, I googled Cthulhu things and this poster came up. I know, I haven't read the books, and I really want to. I just haven't gotten around to it yet, and I really just needed some things to flesh out the background of this piece. I believe it's a symbol of a cult in the book with the fish people. I don't really know, but when I pasted it into Photoshop, it wasn't looking right. So I went through and I relined it so it would look crisp and clean. Now, you guys don't have to sit through the footage. I actually had to sit through doing it. I lost the footage because of the amount of layers and how many straight lines that I needed in this piece. I actually had to go and upgrade the RAM for my computer. I was working with 16 gigs earlier and now I'm up to 32. I've since realized that there are better ways to do all of these straight lines. I was going through and using the pen tool. Each line was on a separate layer that I then merged down. It was a lot for my computer to handle. Also, can I just say, perspective's hard, y'all. Like, it was so difficult for me to put these objects in space, and then I was using the floor as a guideline. I had set up a starburst earlier that I lost the footage of, and it was on a separate layer, but it was really difficult to get everything to line up and to actually look like it was going back in space, like a room would. Also, I know these lines are looking really nice and neat and perfect for an abandoned hospital. Don't worry, I planned on fixing it in post with colors. I just needed to actually figure out this perspective thing that was so daunting. And if it already wasn't hard enough, I decided to add barnacles. Why? It was looking too empty on the wall, and I didn't really have an idea to put a poster there or anything like that. And Cthulhu, water, barnacles, creepiness, it seemed to fit. In hindsight, I think a better way of doing this was to make a scatter brush with barnacles and just trying to add different perspectives in there. It was just really difficult. Instead, I went through, drew a small cluster of barnacles that I was happy with, and then copy pasted, transform tool, filled in gaps where it needed to, and then I just did that over and over and over again until I could get clusters that I was happy with and that actually filled the space. So this got easier the more it went on, because then I could copy and paste larger clusters to fill in more space and things like that. And I eventually got it to a point where I really like it. However, in doing this, I also learned a little thing about myself, in that I hate looking at barnacles. It totally triggered tryptophobia in me. Like, I didn't know, or tryptophobia? Trypophobia. Trypophobia. What? Anyway, that. I learned that it triggered that so hard in me that I could not have the reference up while I did this. Like, looking at the drawings that I did, it's fine. Looking at the reference photos freaked me out to no end. And then I realized I get that same feeling with like honeycomb and like beehive and wasp hive. Oh my god, don't even get me started on wasp hives. But in the end, I was really happy that I went through all the trouble of doing this. I think it filled the wall really, really well and just made it more interesting to look at. I didn't know how I was going to color it, but that's a problem for later, Megan. So for now, I'm happy with how it turned out. Okay, so here, moving on to the apple. Totally forgot to line the apple. And in doing so, I had an idea. What if I hid a skull in the center of the apple? Went through a couple designs, tried to figure out how I might incorporate the eyes, and the nose especially was really difficult, and trying to do like little teeth and stuff. But I actually really like it. I think it came out really well, and I thought it was like a nice little Easter egg just to drop in there. Okay, so here I'm putting in base colors, and I didn't really know what base colors I wanted to use. I just wanted to get some color down, so I'll usually use like a darker color or a lighter color just so I can really see whether or not I am actually coloring within the lines, you know, back to kindergarten. And this goes on for a little bit. Oh, this is so satisfying to do and to watch, honestly. I enjoy watching it. It's just coloring within the lines. It brings joy. Oh, I guess I should explain what I'm doing here. I like to go through, use the lasso tool to select certain sections, so that way I can then just really quickly use the bucket tool or a very large brush to fill in that layer and then have each asset on a different layer, because I like to alpha lock it or lock the transparent pixels so that way the color is easily changeable in the future and I can change it so that way it doesn't look like this green monster. I mean, she's already a green monster, but we want her to look like a cute green monster, you know what I'm saying? So kind of like with the fishnets earlier, I did get the footage this time of me experimenting with textures on the floor. I thought maybe I could import an image of texture over the floor set to multiply. That didn't end up working out. Instead, what I did is I experimented with a couple of brushes. Large ones that had a lot of noise and texture, just so I could have better control over the perspective. So after filling in the checkerboard pattern on the floor, you can see that I went back in with those large brushes and I tried to keep the texture and the noise to the edges of the tiles because I thought that's where dirt and grime would just naturally accumulate, is in the grout of the tiles. And then because this has been an abandoned hospital for some time, just going back in with multiple layers of grime and really trying to just grunge it up, just make it really nasty. You don't want to walk, I mean, you already don't want to walk on hospital floors, but like really don't want to walk on these hospital floors. Now this part's boring. This part is just me filling in lines again for the barnacles, just trying to get pixels on canvas. So I thought during this time, I might as well give a shout out to my partner who really helped manage my mental health on this piece. It was really a lot for me to digest. This was one of the biggest pieces I had ever done. I put a lot of pressure on myself to perform at a really high level and holding myself to an unrealistic standard of trying to do this, my normal 9 to 5, trying to get it done, and just experimenting with things I had never done before. And he really helped in showing me I really need to cut myself some slack. And it really helped me just loosen up with this piece and try to have fun. And I think ultimately myself and the piece are better for it. But also, if you're watching this video and you also really struggle with those kind of issues in whatever career path or whatever hobby you're pursuing, just take some time. It sounds cliche, but take some time, go outside and just let your eyes rest off of this and give yourself permission to say it's okay to not have everything be absolutely perfect. I mean, I've heard this before. I believe it's a quote from Voltaire, but best is the enemy of good. And if you constantly strive for perfection, while that's really great to improve and everything, for me personally, it can be really debilitating. It can be to the point where I can't get things done because it's not to a standard that I'm happy with, so I just don't do it. That doesn't help. I get no practice. I don't improve. So cut yourself some slack. It'll all be okay. All right. Moving on, back to the piece. I was happy with the color palette. That was something I was also really struggling with for this piece. It wasn't sitting right with me, so I decided to go back to that initial reference image and just take colors from there and insert them how I saw fit. Trying to really incorporate greens, but also use reds and trying to keep the color palette limited. I really struggle with color theorying things. It's something that I really want to improve on and learn more about. So for this, I was already overwhelmed. You've heard me say that a million times. I didn't want to be overwhelmed with color theory and the palette and everything. So I really tried to keep everything very restrained, very simple. Also, that I'm bad at color theory. For shadows, I always use a very light purple color. on a different layer, set that layer to multiply, it looks good almost every time. It's a great little digital art hack if you weren't aware of it already. I always use like light purples set to multiply, and then what I'll do is I'll take lighter colors of the base color, set that layer to overlay, boom, highlight, magic. Very little color theory required. I love it. So at this point in the piece, I'm feeling pretty good. The colors are looking good. The lines are mostly done. I've got the base colors done. I've mapped out the shadows. I'm feeling pretty confident. In fact, the first half of this video with me kind of planning out and lining the background, that took me months to do. This part of the video, this took me like 2 weeks to do, just working on it like every single day after work, on my days off. I was really feeling it now. I felt like it was really coming together and I was actually enjoying it. And I was also really excited to try and put the finishing touches on this and really make this pop and stand out, make this the best it can be for my friend who commissioned me. Also, she was the first person to basically ever commission me. Shouts out to her. So now I'm just going through adding details, and I'm really trying to really make certain pieces pop. You know, the poster was standing out a little bit too much, so I'm gonna tone that down. Add a little bit of grunge on the walls. Use the smudge tool that took legit 20 minutes to process the swipes. No joke. Again, 32 gigs of RAM. Okay, so here you can see I am working on her eyes, and at first I thought she might have just pupilless eyes, but then the more I thought about it, the more I thought adding a pupil, especially a slitted pupil, would draw more focus and attention there, more to her face, you know, star of the show. So earlier I worked on basically a shadow map. I made one gigantic layer with my favorite light purple color, and I mapped out where I wanted the light to come from, where I wanted the shadows to be. So what I'm doing now is I'm basically just going through and refining that, really rendering out the hard edges and the soft edges. I try to mix the two so that way it has just a good balance overall to the piece, because if you have too many hard edges, it looks a little too cell shaded, and if you have too many light edges, it just tends to look a little bit muddy. So I'm kind of going through here and just adding another shadow map just to kind of really refine where I want that to be. And I decided to really make these fishnet stockings pop on her. I would kind of darken the whole thing and just make sure to keep the hard edges on one layer and then really blend it out so that way those fishnet stockings look nice and shiny. So another thing that I try to do with shadows is I do shadows in layers. So I'll do just a general shadow layer, and then as I look at it, if I think certain places need to be a bit deeper and darker, I'll actually make another layer with the same purple color, still multiply, and just layer it on top until I feel like a good depth has been achieved. So I'm still working on just the general shadows here, just going into the face and really trying to give that illusion that the face is rounded, especially all of these tentacles coming off, because tentacles are round. So I decided to really go in with a lot of soft blending, soft shadows first, and then I would go back in later and harden up some of those edges just to give it a little bit of contrast. So here I'm doing more of the shadows for the tentacles, and I had to kind of keep in mind that the tentacles overlap each other and how that might affect the shadows. So not only keeping in mind that they are rounded, but also which ones would have more light, which ones would be more in shadow, how I would need to darken up some of those shadows. And here you can also see I'm using the lasso tool because I like to section off the part that I'm going to be working on, and then just use a gigantic brush just to get really nice, smooth transitions, or so that way I can confidently go in with a hard edge without affecting anything around it. So here's a good example of how I might deepen shadows using layers. Go in with a general shadow layer, and then you can see if the color of the bones had been the same color as that shadow of the flaps, it would have all just blended together and just be totally unreadable. So this is when I just made another layer to the same purple color and just set it to multiply. So for the rest of this piece, you'll see me jump around a little bit. I made her nails red, made sure to color in pieces of the apple, added a vignette here because I thought that would kind of help draw your attention to the focus. And then right here is when I totally remembered that I needed to add in an apple a day keeps the madness away. And I also decided to add in a little kiss mark because I thought that would be a little fun and cheeky. So I tried actually writing in my own handwriting an apple a day keeps the madness away, but it just wasn't working out. It didn't look right. So I decided to go in with some text. And I actually decided to use two different types of text. One that was more like a handwritten type of vibe, and then the other just a bit more dramatic to kind of give it that flair. And I set that to madness and apple. Made sure that the red from those two words also matched the red of the kiss mark. All right, it's time. Past Megan's decisions have caught up to present Megan, and I must now deal with them. I have to color the barnacles. Ugh. All right, so let's break it down. I figured the first good step and something that I knew what to do next was just to fill in the center of those barnacles so that way they would contrast against. I use that word a lot, huh? Contrast. Well, it's an important word. So anyway, I did that to contrast them against the outside of the barnacle, and then I went through, added a little bit of shading to the tips of those, and then here I'm kind of experimenting whether to go with an overall shadow or to actually go through and do that individually. I thought I'd lose my mind, so I just decided to go with an overall shadow. So just as I did for the character, I'm going to do for the background. I'm going to reference that initial shadow map that I did and then just go through and refine all the edges. Figure out what I actually want to be in shadow, make the hard edges, and then also use soft edges so that way it kind of gives the feel of like light that's really far away, you know? Oh, and here I'm bouncing back to the eyes for a hot second, just because I felt like they needed to be a little more flirty and just have a little bit more lashes to them. So here's another little Easter egg for you guys. The hand in the foreground is actually supposed to be my friend's hand, and then the feet in the background is supposed to be her husband's feet, just to kind of like incorporate them into the piece a little bit more and make it just a little bit more personal. So now I'm actually going through and coloring all the different background pieces, making sure that the rendering matches everything else, especially the character, and trying to give it the same love and care. So I wanted to make a reference to the books in this piece, so that's what you see here, H.P. Lovecraft, and then the symbol of the Cthulhu on there, just to kind of give a little nod to the source content. And it kind of looks a little simplistic up close, but I needed it to be that way so that way it could kind of read better from afar. And also, I didn't worry about that empty space on the pill cart above the skull because I knew that the text from the an apple a day keeps the madness away would actually cover that. So anything that I even did put there would mostly be covered anyway. Oh, and here's my friend's hand. Hey, how's it going? Fancy seeing you here. Okay, look, I know the shadows look a little crazy on it, but that's just because I usually just go in with like a hue correction. And then that's a really bad outline of the shadow. But hey, look, it works. Okay, it's the final stretch. A lot of what I do now is just kind of final corrections, adding the vignette, darkening the edges of it, and going through and just adding details, making a new to-do list with the very final things that I need to do, which includes this apple. I actually saved this apple last because I was a little afraid to actually try to make it look rotted to its core. And I had a lot more fun with it than I thought I would. Trying to make it look rotten. I had my reference picture there in the corner, trying to keep the edges really nice and dark and curled, but trying to still keep it shiny. And then, especially like the core of it, having those yellows and mixing it with the browns and things, I think that really sold it. Finishing the rendering on the skull. Yes, he had a mustache for a second. I needed to be entertained while I did this. Finishing the rendering on the syringes. Doing the pills. What else did I have to do as final touches? Oh, the lighting of the barnacles, decided to go back and make it look more like water, like it was water behind a screen, and the barnacles were growing on the side of this glass, making it a little bit more blue. Oh, adding red eyeshadow. Oh my gosh, I thought that was so good. I love the red eyeshadow. And this is really kind of what I meant by I jump around a lot on a piece. Adding some final depth and shadow to the teeth. I also decided to add just a little bit of blood. When it's zoomed out, you can't see it, but I thought it was a nice little touch. Fixing some of the color on the shadows, making it deeper, and then going back to the text, just trying to like touch it up more, make it feel more cohesive, adding a little heart because I thought that was cute. And I get a little ahead of myself because I do like hue correction and I do levels and curves just because I'm really excited to finish it, and we're so close to being done. Oh, I can taste it. Bouncing back to the shadows on the pill cart. I also blended out the shadow of the character on the ground just because it makes sense for a shadow to be more blended the farther it is. Just going in and refining that, refining the shadows on my hands, just bouncing all over, honestly. Oh, going back to the eyes, making sure that they really glowed because the background is pretty dark. So making sure that those layers didn't get lost in the... God, I think I ended up with 200 layers by the end of this. It was kind of insane. It was kind of crazy. And since then, I've kind of stop myself from making so many layers, you know, because I love my clipping layers. I love them. So we're approaching the end of this piece. If you guys have stuck with me through the whole thing, I love you so much. You have my undying appreciation. I know this one was huge. This is a very long video. This was a very large piece. But I mean, this is what I did to make this piece. So yeah, I just want to say some final words of thank you so much for even coming here, even watching this. I really appreciate it. Smash that like button, hit that subscribe button. That's what they say, right? I do stream on Twitch if you want to follow me there. I am going to be making some videos of some pieces I did, and then I also have a VOD channel. I have to like make cards or something. I'll put some cards in the corner there. But yeah, follow me other places if you'd like to see more. I plan to do more of these in the future, and so that way you guys can actually see what's going on. So, yeah, thank you so much. And I hope y'all have a really nice day. And now let's go in and see the final product. One last thank you guys so much for watching. You can click on one of these other videos to see what else I have. And have a good day. See ya!